welcome back. My next guest is widely regarded as the nation's leading expert on violence and terrorism. He's got a book, Fear Less, which is currently in stores. Please welcome Gavin de Becker, everybody. Gavin de Becker. Welcome, Gavin.
They stand up for everybody?
They stand up for everybody. Well, they stand up if you're an expert on terrorism. They're not quite sure which side you're on yet, but once they know, they'll be fine. No, I have actually read your book. I read the book you wrote before this, The Gift of Fear. And I have read this, Fear Less, which is the truth about risk, safety and security in a time of terrorism. What do you think of the way we're doing it right now? Are we doing the right thing with the, no liquid on the planes, no shampoo, and all that?
No, we're doing a lot of the wrong things.
Really? Why?
Yeah. Some, I think that, airline security is an important topic. It was before 9/11. There had been plenty of other incidents where people tried to fly airplanes into things. And the government knew that and chose to do, rather than strengthening the cockpit doors, which is the important procedure, chose to do airline screening. Which politically, we all feel it, where the government's doing something, and governments throughout history like to be the way that you are spared from death. They want to tell you only we can save you from being killed.
Right, okay. So if you vote for us, we'll spare you from death.
Yeah, and they don't. They just move it around. If you put more police patrols here, you have more crime over here. It just moves around.
What about you mentioned the strengthening of the cockpit doors, right? Now, every time I'm on a plane, the door is locked, the pilots are in there, they got a little peephole and everything's, But then about halfway through a flight, nearly every flight you're on, they open the door, a pilot comes out and takes a whiz, or they have a little, they take in the
tray
bacon
of coffee and
sandwiches and stuff like that. And
that is actually the biggest problem right now in airline
Is it really?
security.
That really is?
You have hit the #1 problem, because by making the cockpits entry resistant, which every taxi cab in New York City was before 9/11, and of course every, if you've gone a subway, it's entry resistant to get into the cockpit. But by doing that, the government has correctly resolved the biggest problem, which is to stop people from getting into the cockpit.
Right.
But a taxi driver, alone at night at 2 in the morning in New York City, does not stop every 3 blocks and get in the back with you.
Right.
And so
I know a couple of guys who actually will do that.
And you're out at 2 in the morning, so you're finding it.
You can find them. Yeah, you've got to pay a little extra, but you can.
But to open the cockpit door, one of my recommendations in this book is to stop all meal service into the cockpit. You either pre-stock the cockpit, which is easy,
sandwiches,
sandwiches are just fine, or you have a pass-through door. But to open the door during the flight, and then to do it, it would be a small door that opens like you have in a prison cell.
Hey, you want your food left?
Exactly.
All right.
But to open the door is to defeat the entire purpose of the door, and it doesn't happen just once during a flight. It happens 6 or 7 times, and in fact, the flight attendants who visit the cockpit a lot, you want some coffee, you want some tea, you want some sandwiches, are the ones that are most popular. So you always have them going up and knocking on the door, and the bad part is, now if someone gets into the cockpit, the cockpit door is entry resistant. So the rest of us, who really are the heroes of the incidents that happened after 9/11, there were many incidents after 9/11 with people trying to get into the cockpit.
I remember,
all stopped because the passengers now have been trained by the best training film in the history of the world, which is the events that we saw at the World Trade Center.
That's right. So, if someone, tries to hijack a plane now, everyone would say no. But if the cockpit door is locked and the guys get in there, then you've got some
That's the problem. That's correct. So you've identified something.
But what if the pilot needs a pee-pee, though? I mean, in some of these flights, you're doing coast-to-coast 5 hours. I mean, these pilots are, big, tough guys, but you got to go when you got to go.
Maybe bladder training is the important
Bladder
thing.
training?
Yeah, I think so. No. Truthfully, the pilot leaving the cockpit is not as serious a problem as when the flight attendant goes and opens the door. She knocks on the door. We who were sitting in the front of the plane see that happen and now can get up and go into the cockpit. The pilot leaving the door can do so by looking through first and see. And newer planes also can be built, as they are being done now in Israel, with the cockpit to include a bathroom, which is by far the best solution.
And what would you say is the biggest threat to the United States today, then? If not, pilots going to the bathroom?
Probably turning our own precautions against us in the way that the governments do. Throughout history, terrorism has existed, so that is a given. Violence has always existed. It's the only way to deal with very powerful governments. The only option that you have if you're an adversary is terrorism. That's always existed. And always throughout history, the precautions we take are vastly more damaging than the incidents themselves. We've got an incident in 9/11 that is the only time in 230 years that Americans have had a profound transnational terrorist incident on our soil.
Right.
So for something that happens once every 230 years, we have literally turned the country upside down, so that now the population buys into all variety of precautions. Our mail is read, email can be read, habeas corpus has been let go of. Things that if bin Laden had said, do this, if he had said, I want you to do this or I'll put bombs around, I want you to give up habeas corpus, I want you to give up all kinds of freedoms and rights.
Can you explain what you mean by habeas corpus?
Which is the right not to be able to petition the government to not be held against your will.
Right.
So, for example, those 600 people and ultimately the 3,500 people who were held without attorneys in the aftermath of 9/11 didn't have their habeas corpus rights met.
Right.
If a terrorist had asked us to do that, we would have said no way.
Right.
But we, in fact, did it to ourselves. So I'm answering your question, what's the greatest danger? It is that the reactions to terrorism are invariably more potent, powerful, and devastating than the terrorism itself. Terrorism.
So what should we be doing then? What precautions should we take? What can the average American who's traveling on an airline or moving around, I mean, because you talk a lot of that in the previous book and this, about what individuals will should and would actually do. What would you recommend?
Well, I do recommend many of the things that we have done. I recommend entry-resistant cockpits on airplanes.
Right.
I don't recommend taking away of all the little liquids and putting them in plastic and taking off your shoes and standing on one foot and all of the lines and all of the things that have been done to make air travel profoundly unpleasant, but profoundly nice for government, because governments love it when people will do exactly what you tell them at every second.
But what
That's all governments,
what possible advantage would any government get over, you know, taking people's shoes off in an airport? It's not like, oh, haha, now their shoes are off, we can snatch power.
You know what I mean? You know what's funny? I think it's exactly like AHA.
Really?
Yes, I do, because AHA, now they'll do anything in the world because they're afraid.
Oh, I see what you mean. So you use the fear.
Exactly.
Who was it, FDR that said that?
He said nothing to fear but fear itself. But governments throughout history, this is what I'm pointing out, is not about the Bush administration, it's about every government in world history has used fear for political goals.
Wasn't that Caesar said, beware the leader who bangs the drum and speaks of war, because he will take the country from you. I know because I have done this and I am Caesar.
Very true. So you know all this stuff.
I know. I'm interested in that. We have to take a break and we'll come right back. We'll be right back with Gavin de Becker, everybody. Welcome back. I'm here with Gavin de Becker, who, amongst other things, is an expert on the behaviour or the anticipating the behaviour of people who may be violent, both in a terrorist or a domestic situation. That's kind of your stock and trade, right? I remember reading in your first book, you talk about it's a good idea not to watch the local news that much, given the fact, because you always see stuff that'll scare you. Do you think that the media, and I mean, I'm kind of leading you with this question, I guess, but the media hypes up the fear for their own benefit?
Sure, that's the business they're in.
Right.
Business they're in. 45 hours every day in every major city of new, original production designed primarily to cause fear. And a lot of it aimed at women, which is to make women believe that you can't possibly protect yourself and that only men can do it for you. And so you have all these scare stories. You know, they really ought to begin the news, I'll say the Channel 2 news, with, you know, welcome to the Channel 2 news, we're surprised you made it through another day.
Right.
And here's what happened to everybody who didn't. And then there's the death litany, all the ways we die.
And how do they actually, I mean, because obviously these things are happening, they're not making up incidents, but how do they report them? Is there a style of reporting?
There is both. There's a style, and there's also the fact that today in the satellite age, we get the news from anywhere on Earth that an airplane happens to fall to Earth, we get the footage. Right. So you're getting on a plane, you think, oh, I saw that terrible airline disaster. And so it's with satellite. I remember being in a hotel, and I saw a terrible fire downtown on the news. And it was muted, which is my favorite way to watch the news. It looks great. Very serious. A
lot of people watch me that way, you know.
I didn't realize you had sound until I got here tonight. Anyway, they have this, they had a fire, and you see the ambulances, and you see all that stuff, and I think, oh, I better learn what this is. And you turn it on, and it's in Caracas, Venezuela.
Right.
That fire can't possibly interrupt my plans for the day. It can't hurt me in any way. So we get police chases that are from Australia and New Zealand. We get it all every day. There is enough in the world to do it. And then there's the strategies. After 9/11, for example, they used, I saw a story about a cyclone. And it said, next up, direct hit on a small town. Well, they know what we're thinking about, direct hit on a small town.
Of course.
Or terror in the sky. That was a story about a very turbulent flight.
Right.
When we hear terror in the sky, we think, oh, geez, it's another terrorist incident.
Right.
So all of the language that's used, all of the, the warning signs. Next up, an expert tells you the warning signs you need to know about such and such. In my office, we've got this joke that it'll be, next up, burglars who hide out in your purse and rob you when you get home. And then there'd be the warning signs. Purse extra heavy. Voices coming from purse. They're all like that.
I've had voices come from my purse. But what profits? I mean, because no one really does that. I can't believe that people just do that just to scare you. What's in it for a news organization to scare you? What's in it for them? How does it turn into money?
I'll tell you exactly how it turns into money.
Because that's why they'll do it.
100 years ago, the town crier would go down the street and say, 11 o'clock and all's well. And the town crier of today, the local news, goes down the street and says, 11 o'clock and mother's milk causes cancer in children.
Right.
Anything to get our attention. What happens, to answer your question, is nothing gets our attention like fear.
Right.
You can't hear, next up, an expert tells about the dangers of dust to your children. Vacuum cleaners can kill your children, and not, you think, oh, shit, I got to watch that now.
Right, of course, you have to.
And next up, turkey that killed 4 on Thanksgiving. I got to watch about the turkeys.
Yeah.
And so it's the only one you never hear is, next up, a new study that says television news causes stress, suicide, drug addiction, and hypertension.
Yeah, right.
All true, by the way.
Tell you that. Yeah.
Good to hear that applause.
Take that, hand that feeds me.
We go right into the news now, right, of course.
How then, slightly moving off that a little bit for my own personal safety.
Sure.
How should we mark this day, in your opinion? How would you mark, how would you remember the terrible events of 2001?
Well, I think that, to me, an important thing to take away from this is that in these last 6 years, we have not had another transnational terrorist incident in America. The only one we had that was close, the man who could have set fire to explosives in his shoe, was stopped not by government but by civilians on the plane who observed what he was doing. So I think we can look at this day with some gratitude that we have a record, one profound transnational terrorist incident in our history, one, that any other nation on earth would trade that record. It's true, this is the worst terrorist incident in world history. It is. And it's my belief that it will remain so for hundreds of years. That is my belief.
Wow. So you think we should remember that? And I kind of want to take you up, even although we're kind of out of time, but I want to just talk to you about, given the fact that we haven't had those incidents, and we have been following all these procedures, like taking our shoes off, has that helped?
I think in the case of airline security, it has helped.
Right.
Obviously, what happens with terrorism is that when one kind of target is fortified, there's another kind.
Go for another target.
You put the bulletproof windows on the building, and then somebody shoots at the people arriving at work, which happened at CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. So there will always be the terrorist's imagination starts where the security expert or the government's budget ends. But I think that if we say that these procedures in recent years are responsible for no terrorism since 2001, then we have a big question to ask is, what is responsible for the no terrorism for the 200 years prior to that?
Yeah, well, there you have it.
So it isn't all government. It really is individual citizens. In England, you probably lived there at some time in your life.
I did at one point.
So many bombs with the IRA. So many bombs.
Yeah.
And so
I lived there at that time.
Yeah, so did I. And the general public would see a package or would see a suitcase somewhere, and they would be the reason that the thing didn't happen. They would be who calls the police. It's not the FBI.
Yeah.
It's the phone call to the FBI. And that's what all of us can do when we observe something that seems wrong in our culture, even though it will be very, very rare in America that we have transnational terrorism.
All right. Well, stay vigilant, stay alert. It's very nice to talk to you, Gavin. Thank you very much for coming in. Gavin De Becker, everybody. We'll be right back.